Hello and welcome to the Care for the Family podcast with me, Mark Chester, Stephen Hayes.
Hi, Mark.
And Tom Gregory.
Hello.
Tom is our special guest today, and this is the Dad Cave, where we discuss fatherhood in its varying forms and unpack some of the things that just often don't get talked about. So, Tom, welcome to the Dad Cave. It's really good to have you here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. So, I'm Tom Gregory. I've just turned 45 years old.
Don't look a day over 44.
So all right things. I've got two daughters, Rosie, who's just turned 7, and Beatrice, who's about to turn 5. And their mum is Helen, and we all happily live in a place called Godalming down in Surrey.
Excellent. So it's a very female household, which explains why you were reading the Angling Times as we were waiting to start doing this podcast.
It's my hidden passion.
It's where you escape. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, I'm fully outnumbered, but honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. It's we're a lucky bunch.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's really good to have you here. And Tom, what we always start off these podcasts with is dad jokes, and we have pre-warned you, so we know you've come with a dad joke.
Yeah.
And but we're going to go to Stephen first, maybe, if that's okay, Stephen. Now, Stephen's jokes are a bit like unicorns. So these good jokes are a bit like unicorns. So you can take that one of two ways. Either they make you feel very happy, or they just don't exist.
Okay.
So it's whichever one.
I mean, I feel like you've snuck in a joke there, Mark, and not a particularly good one.
It wasn't a very good one, though. That was more of a dad joke, wasn't it?
All right.
Go on, Stephen. Far away.
So, given that, as people will come to learn that you've done a bit of swimming in your time, I've tried to make it topical. So, what did the ocean say to the swimmer?
Don't know. What did the ocean say to the swimmer?
Nothing. It just waved.
Ooh. Alex, get a thumbs up. That's all right.
You're easily pleased, Tom.
I know.
You're a generous lot.
Yeah.
I really feel I have to explain to people listening to this and watching it that you do make up your own jokes, don't you?
Yeah,
they are your own.
It's his own work. Yeah.
Yeah, I, to be honest, that one was pinched. I had one that was full of controversy, and I backed down.
And you went with the safe option.
I went for yeah.
Okay, so this one's really safe. So jokes about white sugar are rare enough, but jokes about brown sugar, dem are rarer.
Oh. It's all right. It's all right.
Yeah, it's not still elicited a groan, though, didn't it?
Which I find myself laughing.
Yeah.
So you can laugh and die inside at the same time.
Okay.
So Tom, it's your big moment. Here you go.
Yeah.
Your dad
well,
joke.
I won't do very well. But so you did tell me in advance, and I actually said to Rosie last night as she was sat at the table doing homework. I said, Rosie, what's my best ever dad joke? And she just simply said, "You've never told one," i.e., a good one. So then the only one I always fall back on is the only thing I can remember under pressure, and which is, what do you call a mushroom with loads of money?
Don't know. What do you call a mushroom with loads of money?
The fun guy to be with. But
Very good.
Excellent. I think we should move on from dad jokes rather swiftly. Okay.
I know. I think we hold the world record for worst podcast segment.
Yes, we do. Yeah, it's amazing that anyone's still listening, isn't it, to be honest? So anyway, let's kick off talking about the subject today. So we're going to be talking a lot about your childhood, Tom, because it was no ordinary childhood. You achieved something that was, really, it was breathtakingly spectacular, and that's not to over-egg the pudding, because you swam the English Channel as a child. So, how old were you when you swam the Channel? And tell us a little bit about that.
I'll just say one thing. So, just as a sort of bit of clarification for my mind, I think I had a pretty ordinary childhood, but with an extraordinary insert. Which is a slightly different thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, to answer your question, so I still hold the world record for being the youngest person to swim the Channel, and that's because on the 6th of September 1988, I swam from France to England. It took me just under 12 hours. I swam just about 32 miles, and broke a world record, and it's still a world record. Only on the point that no one's allowed to break it anymore because they changed the rules. So were it not for that, I think somebody would have long broken it a long time ago. But that is the fact of it. Yeah.
Mm.
Wow.
I mean, I read your book, A Boy in the Water, and it's absolutely fascinating and jaw dropping as well, really, because to imagine someone doing that at such a young age is a bit mind blowing. And also, you mentioned there about the world record that it will never be broken because the rules have been changed. I mean, it must be quite nice to think that in a couple of centuries' time, your name will still be in the record books.
I'm going to sound contrary, aren't I? So I sort of see it the other way. I think a sporting view of it would be, records are there for breaking, and they're there to encourage people to do things and to have targets and things to focus on, ambition and all that stuff. So I've never thought there should be a rule. I just thought, well, it's not age, is it? If it was about age, then I did it at 11. Why make a rule for someone who's 12? And that's not fair.
Yeah.
Fairness is important, isn't it? Particularly when you're bringing up kids.
Yeah.
And so, for that reason, I just don't think I can see why they did it.
Is it a safety thing? Presumably?
Yeah, it was. And in '88, it was news for a day, right? 48-hour news cycle and a few breakfast telly appearances, and then it kind of just drifted into the background of my life, certainly. But it got a lot of attention, and people were really pleased. Ended up on Blue Peter and all that kind of stuff, and on the news at 10, and it was a moment in our
Did you get a badge?
family. Yeah, I got a gold badge.
Wow. My wife has 4 badges. This has come up more than once on this podcast, and she never got a gold badge.
That's it. Yeah. So,
and did you have the Guinness World Record?
Yeah, it still pops up once in a while. I mean, there's so many world records, aren't there? They can't possibly crowbar them into that book.
No.
But I can't remember the last year that it appeared in there. But once every few years, it will get rolled out and put into print. So that's a nice little thing to check out in Smith.
Incredible.
And it's testament to your humility, really, that you're saying that you wish that rule wasn't there, so your name wasn't necessarily in the record books. But you actually spoke out against the change of rule at age
12, actually. 12. It was at the AGM. And
just the day after the swim.
It was about a month after it.
Was it really?
I mean, look, they had a problem to solve because, the year that I swam, and she should be remembered, a lady called Renata Agondi. She was Brazilian, 24 years old. She was world-class swimmer. Died trying to do what I was doing. And it was about a week or 10 days before I made my attempt. And she died of the cold, and that happens, right? Sadly, that it shouldn't happen, but it has done, probably will continue to. And so, of course, they couldn't be shut down by the authorities. And they thought, well, if at the point where my swim got a whole load of attention, inundated with applications for the following season to break a record, and then it's not hard to see, is it, from that point that a child might die, and then all of a sudden you're going to get sports shut down. So I think they had something to solve there. So I have.
So what age did they change it to?
It was 12 for a couple of years, and I think it went up to 16. I think it still is. In fact, it might even be 18 now. I'm not sure.
And do you think your swim actually brought more attention to it?
Oh, for sure, yeah. Well, as soon as you're on the news and getting a gold Blue Peter back, people still get in touch with me. Well, they can now. Obviously, wrote it all down.
Yeah.
It was sort of broadly anonymous for 30 years, but people still get in touch and say, "I just want to let you know that I saw you when I was a kid, and you're the reason why I've just swum the channel sort of 25, 30 years later."
Wow. No way.
So yeah, it does. It just sort of sticks in people's minds in the way that things do when you're a kid.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's fascinating that it did. There wasn't much talked about for 30 years, and then you published the book, and it won the William Hill Sports Book of the Year award in 2018, didn't it? So it brought it back to the public's attention in a big way, didn't it? Really?
Yeah, that was peculiar actually, because it was nestled in my past as just a sort of happy memory, really, and always something I've been, quietly proud of, but I didn't talk about it. And I remember getting a phone call. I was at work, and it was the press office from my company, and they said, "Oh, there's a reporter, and they want to speak to you. They've traced you to us." I said, "What they want? What's that about?" And they said, "It's about swimming." Okay, that sort of makes sense. And the guy, Owen Amos, his name was, writes for the Beeb, and he said, "Look, I've just come across the fact that you, Tom Gregory, hold this world record for being." And at the time, like the last time I'd seen that was on a pub quiz machine or. Like watching 15 to 1, and it would come up as a sort of trivia question.
That must be so surreal.
It was at uni.
Yeah.
Hey guys,
I'm the answer to a question.
I'm the answer to a question.
I've never been the answer to
someone's
question.
But I used to love the randomness of that.
Yeah.
And I didn't mind the randomness of being phoned up by this guy Owen. Anyway, he said, "Look, I've Googled you. There's nothing out there on this at all," which made sense because I've never spoken about it. or even tried, no one ever asked, actually. As I say, it's just in the past.
He didn't have your "I swum the channel" T-shirt on all the time.
Well, correct. Yeah. Who would, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, he asked if he could do an interview for the website, BBC website, and I agreed on one condition, which would look nicely back to you, Mark. And I said, well, look, this story isn't actually about me. I know it is about me on some level because I'm the guy who does the swim, but it's actually about someone else. And it's this guy, John Bullitt, who was this coach. I said, on the condition that you write it from that angle, certainly from my point of view, then permission granted. And he was good to that. Right, he was good to his word on that. Mm-hmm. And then I expected, like internet obscure, extreme sports obscure, but it wasn't. It was on the front page of the thing that you click on at lunchtime when you're eating your sandwiches, and millions of people see that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, all of a sudden, people are phoning up for all sorts of things. And then the next thing I know, I'm on Radio 4 with Asma Mir and Richard Cole's Legends both. Yeah. In a scenario not dissimilar to this, shaking, right? My water, I drunk all my water and the red light goes on and it's sort of Bush House on a Saturday morning. I was absolutely terrified. Telling this story to Asma Mir. And then as the way these things, evolve, next thing I'm, trying to write it down and trying to persuade an agent that it might work. Yeah. He said, well, I don't know if it's going to work, but I wrote a few bits and we hawked it around the publishers and they all went for it. All of them went for it. And so I got the privilege of being able to write it all down finally.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic read. It is really good. I'm intrigued because you said at the beginning you had an ordinary life and this was an extraordinary event. So tell us about your ordinary life, about your family, about your swimming, and about John as well.
Yeah, I mean, so the bit that I say quite a lot on this is no one ever believes is I was a distinctly average, non-exceptional child. I really was. I wasn't big, I wasn't tall, I wasn't fat, I wasn't thin, I wasn't particularly smart, I wasn't really thick. I was just down in the middle in everything. And I was a younger brother of there's two, Anna's my older sister, and if I'm honest, we were a little bit achingly middle class. Like dad was a solicitor, mum was teaching a local school, and we were just kind of get through everything, as we were growing up. And I grew up in Eltham. Mum and dad are still there, and just look circumstances. So we moved here, and mum thought I needed another hobby. I disagreed. I'm like, I've got conkers, got football stickers, got everything I need. Orient, Yeah. And she
I love how conkers was a legitimate hobby.
It was, still was. And she got us into the swimming club, and our cousins were already there. And it just so happened that in landlocked Eltham in southeast London, there was a swimming club that was run by a bloke who'd set it all up for himself, and it was into channel swimming. And I didn't believe any of that when I first turned up. But here's the sort of almost remarkable fact. Even I now accept this is remarkable. So in the 4 years from when I sort of walked in there age 7 or 6 or 7, in 4 years, I went from not being able to swim a 15-metre width in the small pool because I couldn't really swim to being able to swim 32 miles across those straits, right?
4 years.
In 4 years.
So you were 7 when you went to that club?
Yeah. And I think it's an important point that. And so if I go and talk to a school about it and I talk to the children, students, I make that point quite clearly because it shows what young people are capable of. It shows what happens when you give youngsters an environment and some coaching and a space within which to succeed, right? But you need the coaches. And so that's why it's the story about John, not me, because he's the guy really who makes all this happen.
Yeah, and John was a real father figure to you, wasn't he? And I mean, it'd be really good to talk about father figures. I don't know, Stephen, have you had any father figures in your life?
I suppose you can have different sorts of father figures, can't you? Because if perhaps someone, and I guess we can unpack this as we talk, but I sometimes think of father figures being filling an area where perhaps your own dad didn't fill. So I don't know. I couldn't say there's like, oh yeah, I've got a clear-cut person who's like a obvious father figure to me. Yeah. I've had, a youth worker growing up, which was probably about the closest thing, who, when my parents split, was very much like on it, there for me, checking up on me, but not in the same way by any stretch. Did you?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because it requires some thinking about, doesn't it? Really, it requires some thinking through of who they were. And I know John Bullitt for you was a very clear father figure, a very dominant sort of father figure in your life.
He became one. Yeah.
I think for me, there were some father figures. There was a Sunday school teacher, a youth leader. But when I was reading your book, what I think I realised was that actually I played sport when I was a teenager in adult teams, both football and cricket, and there were a lot of father figures in those teams actually, and some of them taught me as much about how I didn't want to live my life as I did want to live my life, and some I thought actually, yeah, I like that about that person, but most of them, they were mixed. You know, there was good and bad aspects to them, but they were still father figures to me, and they helped me evaluate my own life in the context of seeing how they operated, not just the good things they did, but the other things, because nobody's perfect.
Was that more in your sporting endeavours, though?
No, I think it was. I think you can. I learn a lot from the way people conduct themselves in sport about life in general, and the way I conduct myself in sport. You know, and some of the reflections on that. I think you learn a lot about yourself, and I like that about reading about John in your book, is that you don't paint him as an angel.
No, well, he didn't need to be, did he?
Describe him a little bit to us.
Sure. I mean, my first reaction is that you know, there's space for more than one set of relationships in all of our lives. So I didn't have any massive gaps. You know, my dad's a wonderful guy, very calm, very caring, I can't run out of superlatives. My dad, he's just fantastic. So I don't think there was anything that needed filling as such. And John became a father figure because I was drawn to him. There's no doubt. I think a lot of us are drawn to people that are different from the ones that we already know. And John was absolutely different. So, you know, dozy teachers don't know what to do. You know, very parents don't know what they're doing. You know, he was unconventional. He was a bit of a rebel. He was irascible, absolutely. He could be unpredictable. All those things, a little bit belligerent. But he was also incredibly good fun. So I definitely was drawn to him because I found him interesting. And he was very, very kind, right? So underlying all these slightly peculiar behaviours sometimes, you know, was a lot of love. You know, there's no other word for it, right? He didn't have a family of his own. Okay, he was an orphan of the war and was adopted into this country. Now, we never knew that, I hasten to add, when he was alive. We only found out afterwards. But it did explain a few things because, you know, there's people out there who have an awful lot to give, right? Those coaches, they change lives, right? Yeah. And John was somebody who had that gift of being able to inspire youngsters and instill in us a whole raft of values and things which we can probably talk about in a minute, I guess. But that was the relationship that I formed with him in that short period of time, meaningfully about 2.5 years actually that happened.
So in terms of the narrative here, so you're 7 and you join the swimming club. At what point does John enter the scene, and at what point was it then this is going to be the guy that's going to, you know, we're making this decision, we're going to do this together. Yeah. And
there's a lift-off moment.
Yeah, right. And then within that, what was your own dad's input and feelings on the matter? Yeah,
good question. So that, I mean, the way it evolved, when I was 8, Anna and I were asked to go with the big kids, you know, the teenagers, to Lake Windermere for this sort of training camp. And at the end of that training camp, there was an event where you had to swim across the widest part, which is a mile, right? And it's cold out there in June, July, but it must have been July.
UK, it's cold.
It was still cold. Yeah. Anyway, so I got across that, right? And I thought, yeah, I've done it. And in John's mind, you could see it like whirring away. So the next year I'm back and I'm 9, I'm swimming half the length, about 6 miles. And the next year I'm 10 and I've done the length, and that's 10.5 miles. And nobody's done that before. So then the year after, we think, well, we know the record's 12. He knew that because he'd already broken it. Hence that point about succession, right? Don't set rules that stop other people achieving stuff. Yeah. Well, he knew that because he already broken the record with this guy Marcus. And we also knew that could only be possible in time once, and it would be in 1988. So in 1987, when I got across the length, he was clear that, you know, next year, if you work really hard, you may get the opportunity to try and break a world record. And of course, to me, by then I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. And so that sort of, you know, chain of events was then set in motion, which was, you know, supercharged swimming for about 18 months to get to that point of resilience.
That's amazing at 10 to be like, yeah, I want to do that. Like my niece is
Yeah.
10. It's
I
so
think,
young.
Yeah, but I mean that's the power of the swimming club. So there's a temptation, and I think when people read the book, I think it comes through that it's actually about this club. He built a community. I call it a swimming club. It's more of a community of people who were self-starting. There's no national lottery funding. We've got no sports nutrition. This is the 80s, right? Making stuff happen for themselves anyhow, right? So everybody could participate, no matter how much money you earned or what car your dad had, all that stuff. It was about participation and teams, right? And so that sort of movement was enough to sweep us all through. It was very powerful. And I think, to your other question about dad, right? Mum and dad could see all that because everything was about, in the eye line. So they could see for themselves the evidence of what was in front of them. Some sort of parental level, I think, there was every reason to be comfortable with what they could see. There's another bit that probably I wish I'd acknowledged more actually when I wrote it down, was that in dad in particular there was a huge amount of selflessness, because looking back on it I can absolutely see that he had willingly allowed John to occupy, can I say, some of the emotional terrain that a father might look to or might see as their own, right? Which was hugely selfless, because he could see that I was kind of devoted to this guy, and he could also see that sometimes John could, not give me a hard time as such, but it was tough. The training was tough. Emotionally, the preparations were tough, and sometimes, I'd come home and I'd be in tears or something. And Dad would have a decision to make.
That's tough, isn't it? It'd be easy for him to be like, do you know what? I need to protect you from this.
Yeah.
But actually, he knew he needed.
Well, and that's the other thing, is people sometimes, when they hear of the sort of the bare facts, if you like, one of the first reactions, you must have really pushy parents. And nothing could be further from the truth, My sister has a phrase for it, which sort of landed in our family, which is benign neglect, which is sort of allowed to sort of roll off and do stuff,
Yeah.
And,
80s though,
It was, different
time.
times. Yeah.
It's easy to perhaps focus on sometimes the difference between John Bullitt and your dad. But actually, when I was reading the book, something that struck me strongly was something that they both did that was very similar. Because when you swam Windermere and your mum and dad were there to meet you, and you got out of Windermere, out of the lake, and your dad, I think, gave you a hug, and he said, "We'll always be there when you need us." And then later on, I think in the book, you're on a swimming trip and you're a bit homesick, and John says to you, "I will always look after you." And it really struck me quite sharply that actually there are a lot of differences between them, but there was something there that was the same, and they were both looking out for you.
Made the hairs on my arms go.
Same,
You're the first. I don't think even I'd picked that. There's almost a parallel in the. And I can remember what I wrote. You're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But I think that's an ever-present value there. So we haven't mentioned the T word yet. So trust. This was all about trust on some level. I trusted John. My parents trusted John. John trusted us to do the best by him, and part of that sort of community set of values. And that's really what underpinned the whole thing. Because on some level, even I would accept that it's a little bit dangerous, kind of. But that you can't live a life without risk. It's not possible. And so you just have to do the whole the thing to prevent the risks from materialising, right? Yeah. So I think that's true. They did have that in common. Their behavioural set was very different, though.
Yeah, and they also clearly had some disagreement at times. There was the thing about the newspaper article when it appeared in the Standard about your intentions to swim the channel. Yeah. And John upset you then, didn't he? Because he wouldn't talk to you. So tell us a little bit about that, because that's quite interesting, the dynamic between your father and John.
I've never really got to the bottom of this myself. I'm just, that story it's a memoir. It's a recollection of what happened and how I felt about it at the time. It doesn't really pass judgment on those things. Actually, it's just that. But that night. This thing had broken in the Standard. John had thought that Dad had taken it to the paper, and Dad would have never done that. And there was a bit of an argument, right? And John refused to talk to me. And of course, imagine your parent not talking to you. And I was quite a sensitive soul, and I was confident, but I was sensitive. And I just burst into tears. And there was a bit emotionally violent on some level. It wasn't a nice thing to do to a 10-year-old kid.
How did you know he wasn't talking to you?
Because I bound into his office, as I used to, say, "Hey, hi, John." And he's not talking to you. And that was it. He said, "I'm sending you to Coventry." And I didn't understand that phrase, and for many people wouldn't, but it amounts to, I'm not speaking to you. But of course I thought, what's in Coventry? There's a canal there. Sometimes we go on holiday there.
Mark
on a
threatens to
canal
send me to
boat.
Coventry quite often.
But
I've always wondered.
I don't even know the origin of the phrase, but,
No.
but that's what it sort of meant in that context. And I just thought, why are we going to Coventry? And then I realised he wasn't replying to me, so I sort of ran down the stairs into the changing rooms in floods of tears. And Dad lost it. Like, right, no. But I mean, I think, gosh, that's probably the only thing that really stands out in those 4 years of any kind of tension between a parent and a coach, which, on the scheme of things, you could argue is pretty mild.
Yeah. And a remarkable relationship between, like you say, your parents and John and you and your parents. There's some strength there, isn't there, in that kind of all those relationships, parents, father figure, and son working together.
I think that's true. And one other thing I'll throw, I'm reminded by a phrase that I picked up from one of my American friends. It takes a village. It's the idea that it takes a village to raise a child. Yeah. And I came across it a few years ago, actually. But that reminded me of being young, because that swimming club, or community as I could term it, was full of other parents and, even distant members of our family, right? There was a couple of other coaches and senior swimmers who sort of appeared on the scene, all of who played a role of reassurance or mentoring or just general kind of looking out for me, my sister, one another. And so it wasn't all about one person. There was a team of folks who sort of made all that possible.
Yeah. It'd be good to just talk a little bit about how all of this has actually affected your own parenting. But before we do that, we've got a new feature that we've thrown in
new
just to help us get to know our guests a little bit better. I mean, we'll probably in time come up with a jingle for this, Mark, that I would love you to take lead vocal on. But yeah, it'd be good to just, I'm going to ask you some of your favourites, and it's quick fire. So
go on then. So don't think about it. Okay.
Right. So, what's your favourite film?
Shawshank.
Nice. Favourite sports team?
Orient, Leighton.
Favourite sport?
Cricket.
Favourite book?
Oh, gosh. Right now, White House and Mortimer, Gone Fishing.
Well done for not saying your own book. Favourite TV show?
White House and Mortimer Go Fishing.
Favourite superhero?
Spidey.
Yep. Favourite former Prime Minister?
Former Prime Minister. Oh, gosh. I didn't mind David Cameron until he went rogue.
Sure. Favourite tipple?
I don't mind a brandy.
And favourite song?
God, that's impossible. Because you asked me the thing about Whitney Houston, I'm going to have to say how well I know, but it's not the answer.
Oh, brilliant. That certainly helped. I'm surprised swimming didn't come up at all in any of that, but there we go.
Yeah. Excellent. That was, fantastic, enlightening. Anyway, let's get back to, I'm thinking about your parents and now you as a dad, because you've got two daughters. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned about the fact that Renata Agondi died, a week before you swam the channel. Yeah. So that strength, that relationship between your parents and John and John you was so incredibly trustful, as you said. Yeah. I'm just wondering about how you would feel now. Perhaps you've got the perspective of being a father yourself, and you can put yourself in your dad's shoes, your mum's shoes, as they were then. How would you feel about letting the girls go into basically trusting them to
I think it depends on what I could see, right, and what I could trust for myself, because I think. The rational answer to all of this, and there's two answers actually. The rational answer is trust what you can see and what you can judge, yeah? And so if it was in the world of long-distance swimming, I think I'll probably be able to form a pretty accurate view, right? Because it's something I understand, I know about it. I would be able to see if they were being coached properly, or just over time you'd form an impression. So for me, the idea of Rosie swimming the channel at 11 and a bit years doesn't worry me, right? The chances of that are zero, by the way. Because they're not allowed to. And actually, even if they were allowed to, I'm not sure my wife would have the same view. We're a partnership, right? But from my perspective, all right. There's another bit that's not about what you can rationally observe. There's a bit about how you feel. I'm no poster boy for sort of neglecting our kids. I have exactly the same primal reactions as anybody else when they get near the road, or, when, I don't know, going up the Monument Tower or something. If I don't like heights, I hate heights, right? Rosie and B, no problem at all.
It's terrifying, isn't it?
It's the old cliff top walk, on the summer holiday. I can't bear it. I'm the most nervous parent that you could ever imagine. And so I know that both things are true at once. And so if it was some sort of endeavour, I don't know, can I go and be a F1 driver. I'm like, no, is it safe? How do I know? So I would be nervous about the things I couldn't understand. I think is the
Yeah, and that is the truth of these things, isn't it? It's a lot more complicated than we think. It's not black and white, isn't it? There's lots of things entangled. I mean, I don't know how you'd feel, Stephen, with your girls. They're very young, and perhaps you haven't experienced any of that letting go yet. But
I guess there's incremental, age appropriate letting go moments, isn't there? So the first time I ever came back to work, it was like I'm not there today to help. Then there's crash. And someone else is looking after them, or there's little moments where, or even parents helping and them being with their grandparents for a few hours. It's like
I think some of it's learned behaviour as well. I mean, I'm not great at letting them out of my sight, even though I know that in theory I should be fine with that. They're getting to the age now where I need to be able to sort of just let them go free range a bit, But I'm not naturally good at that, so I don't know.
The two answer thing is, I think, is so true, because I was a kid in the early to mid 90s, and I remember just going out. Mum going out, okay, I'm going to call for John or whatever.
Yeah,
I just left the house.
Yeah,
didn't have a mobile phone.
As did I.
Yeah, so that was just the way of it. Whereas now, that's just not the done thing. We have mobile phones, and I don't think the threat necessarily is any worse, but we receive so much information, we think it's probably worse, even though it's probably as safe now as it ever was.
I think it's absolutely true.
Yeah. I think the hardest part of fatherhood for me, so my kids are 24 and 20, the hardest part of fatherhood for me has been letting go all the way through. And I think, Stephen, what you made was a really good point there. Actually, you start letting go right from the start, effectively, little by little. It's very small amounts at the start, and then it gathers pace a little bit.
Yeah.
But there is that protective instinct in there, isn't there? Which,
I wouldn't want to override it.
No.
It's a very unnatural thing to do, isn't it?
It's called instinct for a reason, isn't it? Yeah. Anything, I want to protect them with every shred of my being for as long as humanly possible. But equally, I want them both to be confident women going out in the world and knowing how to handle themselves. And I guess, the care for the family side, and it's you're putting into them as much as you can when they think you're a superhero to them.
Yeah.
And then slowly the peer group comes in, and Stacey in the schoolyard's opinion matters more than yours, and then suddenly it starts to shift. So I think I'm like, just pour my values and the stuff I want them to remember now, so that when I do have to let go that bit more, and it's not crash, but it's I want to go to so and so with the girls on a holiday for a weekend. I'm suddenly like, I want to know I've given them the best chance of making the right choices when I'm not there.
Well, the other bit that the thought you trigger there is listening to you talk is we're all still doing this for the first time. So I don't have children older than the age of 7, so I don't know what it's like to have a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
And so it is the first time that I'll be parenting through that age bracket and the new challenges that brings. And so I think maybe the thought that I have is sort of try and keep learning, or try and keep asking yourself the questions.
Yeah.
Are we getting this one right?
Yeah.
That must be what it's like when you're going through and they're 20 and 24, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you're properly. They've flown the nest.
Yeah.
So it's
flown the nest, but keep coming back.
yeah.
So it definitely is. I'm wondering, Tom, do you ever speak to your dad about what happened all those years ago?
A little bit. I mean, he's really proud of that, but he loves that book, and it was important for me that. Because everybody played a good part. There were no baddies in the book. Right? So
there's no,
it was important that everybody was
antagonist.
reflected properly and fairly. Yeah. I loved writing about Dad and things. So no, I think he's taken a great amount of joy from that, which is a thrill for me because he deserves it, as does Mum, right?
Yeah.
I haven't spoken about my Mum, but yeah. So no, I don't think we talk about it so much now. I'll drift over to the house once in a while and he'll have a stack of books for his mates, who's probably bored to death about,
That's sweet.
about his son's book. It gets him to sign them.
That's so nice. What do your girls think?
Good question. I mean, Rosie's the oldest, so she sort of processed it more.
So she knows you've written a book.
She said to me, what did she say to me once? She said, Daddy, when I'm older, I'm going to swim the channel twice. That way I'll have 2 books and you'll have 1. So she's obviously sort of making some connections to it. Yeah. And I tried to sort of I try to make her less competitive, but I think it's something natural with her.
Yeah.
There's a bit like that, actually.
So you were able to tell John Bullitt about how you felt about him, and so tell us about the opportunity to do that and what happened.
Yeah, so it's not a massive spoiler for people who haven't read the book, but the sort of sad end bit is that we lose John not long after that record is broken. The Christmas that followed, John suffers a very heavy series of strokes and passes a couple of weeks afterwards, which, I mean, it's always hard to talk about this, but I mean, it's just a wrecking ball through a 12-year-old kid's life. That community, my family, all the children and people who he'd supported in our wider world, and that's grief, right? That is proper, because I was as close to him as any member of my immediate family, and so an absolute tidal wave of grief, which sort of took some getting over, but of course. Part of the way I was brought up was to try and talk about one's emotions and to tell people how you feel about them in a positive way. And so Dad, when we went to visit him, Dad had explained that this would be the last visit. So I sort of read between the lines, and we were definitely going to die then. And he was on his tubes, unconscious, etc. And I just went in on my own, and then the nurse let me have the room. And I just told him I loved him, and I said thank you for my world record and things, and for my friends and all that stuff. And I'm really glad that I had the courage as a 12-year-old to say all that stuff.
That's amazing.
And even more amazing was the fact that, of course, he heard, right? So he might have been unconscious, but then he raises his arm and squeezes my hand, and I knew he'd heard all of those things, and that I'd told him those things, which would have been enormously important to John. He would have wanted to have been told that. And so, yeah.
So what would you say? So, I mean, you never quite know what the big point of these conversations is going to land on, but I think it's quite culturally for men, telling each other what you mean to each other. It's not the done thing.
Yeah.
So do you has that carried through? Has that
carried
through in adulthood? And what would you say to guys who never tell their friends I love you? And
well, sometimes I do know that blokes often find other ways of doing it, right? So they might not
say the exact opposite.
They might not say, I love you, mate. They might give you a big cuddle. They might, we're quite physical animals, some of us, not all of us, but some of us. We're all different shapes and sizes, let's be honest. But I think men do find a range of mediums of expression. Dance now.
Tap jazz.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of what carries through to parenting, our kids know they love them. We tell them, make a point of telling them, because I want them to know that they're loved, and they do understand that. You mentioned confidence for your two, and that's definitely something that I think about a lot. Because my dad and I used to talk about it. My dad had a thing because I was outwardly, as a kid, I was seen as quite cocky. Inwardly, I actually wasn't that confident at all, but I projected someone who was, which was part of the reason why John Bullitt pulled me out to do this stuff, right? But inwardly, I was much more sort of emotional, and I could sort of detect some similar things repeating themselves.
Yeah.
And my dad, made a point. It was a bit of a thing in our family for a while, actually, because not everyone agreed, with how I was being brought up. And my dad sort of thought, well, no, I'm not gonna bash that out of him, not physically, but you know what I mean, metaphorically, because confidence matters, and that's one thing I want for my daughters, is to have that inner confidence, that sort of inner resilience. It's an overused word these days, sadly, but there's something about having some belief in yourself, and I think a lot of that stems from knowing that you're loved. And so if I draw the threads between it all, that's the reason it's important to tell them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. That's a lovely point to sort of draw to a close on, I think, Tom, really, just talking about your daughters there. And what we always ask people in the Dad Cave, and you may have answered this already in that question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case. We always ask people, what do you want to pass on to Rosie and B? It could be an object, it could be a passion, it could be a hobby, a value. What is it that one thing that you'd really like to pass on to the girls?
Kind of slightly more than one. So on the value thing, I think we talked about confidence, but there's something else that goes with it, which is empathy, and let me qualify that, right? The reason why I think empathy, above all other sort of human characteristics, is that the more I think about it, the more it's the driver of other things. So, an act of kindness is probably precipitated by a moment of empathy, which makes you think, I need to do something kind for that. But an act of bravery or courage is probably triggered by a moment of empathy where you recognise that something needs to happen. Does that make sense? And I think, if I can give or help give our kids that habit of empathy, of seeing the world through other people's eyes, I think that's absolutely fundamental. Because from that platform, if I was to have to choose one thing, I guess that's the driver of so many other things that probably make one happy, inwardly contented. More important than that, I would give them the keys to my garage, because in the garage is a lifetime's worth of fun. Seriously.
Really?
Yeah. But so, I mean, I'm a serial hobbyist, right? And I love doing stuff. Always have done since I was very, very little. And that's what life's for, right? Just doing stuff and having fun with it. And so at some point I will give them a key each so they can have access to my vast collection of fishing rods, the kayaks, the boxes of CB radios, the rugby balls, the tennis rackets, the cricket bats, the camping gear, the tents, all the sort of paraphernalia that is about, living life as an adventure. And then when they can drive, they can have the camper van, which the book paid for, so they can go and take themselves off on a proper adventure.
Yeah, fantastic. That makes me want to look inside the garage.
Can we have a key as well?
Yeah, CB radio, that really takes me back, the CB radio.
Nostalgia.
But that's fantastic. Tom, on your channel Swimming Association badge, it says France to England 1988, and then it has two words, and I love it, youngest conqueror. And so Tom Gregory, youngest conqueror, thank you so much for joining us in the Dad Cave today. It's been a real privilege to have him, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
Stephen?
Wonderful.
Yeah. And that was the Dad Cave. So thanks for listening and watching, and we hope you can join us next time.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed that or found it helpful, please do click the like button. If you're new to the channel, you can subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about all our latest videos. Finally, if you're in a position right now to support Care for the Family, you can do so following the link in the video description. As a thank you, we'll send you a load of resources for you and your family. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.